In June 2018, a horror movie hit theaters with a 90% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Some of you may not know, but this is the second time this exact pattern has shown up on this channel, and it's worth noticing. 90% of critics called Hereditary one of the most disturbing, brilliant horror films in years. The people who actually paid to see it opening night gave it a D+, one of the worst grade CinemaScore hands out, reserved for movies audiences walk out of feeling genuinely angry. Test screenings back at Sundance left the cast themselves describing the experience as chilling to actually make. Toni Collette delivered what's now widely regarded as one of the greatest performances in horror movie history, and the Academy didn't even nominate her. A24 took a real gamble releasing this wide instead of quietly, the same bet they made on The Witch 2 years earlier, and it worked, turning a $10 million family drama wearing a horror movie's face into one of the studio's biggest hits ever. This is the story of Hereditary, and why the exact audience that hated it most on opening night is the reason it became a modern classic. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Welcome to the land of sci-fi and horror breakdown. If you've subscribed, let's begin. Hereditary follows Annie Graham, played by Toni Collette, a miniature artist processing the death of her secretive, estranged mother Ellen. Her teenage daughter Charlie, played by Millie Shapiro, was unusually close to her grandmother and reacts to the loss in increasingly disturbing ways, while her older brother Peter, played by Alex Wolff, and her psychiatrist husband Steve, played by Gabriel Byrne, watch the family slowly come apart around them. What begins as a patient, devastating film about grief and inherited trauma pivots roughly halfway through into something else entirely, revealing that Ellen's death was never really the beginning of this story, it was the middle of something that's been in motion for generations. Without spoiling the specific turn, it involves a hidden occult conspiracy the family didn't know they were already part of. Collette's performance carries the entire film, moving from quiet grief into a kind of unraveling that's been called one of the most physically committed pieces of acting horror has ever produced, and it's the reason the film works even in its most extreme final stretch. Hereditary marked the feature directorial debut of Ari Aster, who'd previously built a reputation in short film, most notably with the deeply unsettling The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. That short caught A24's attention and led directly to them greenlighting his first full feature. Aster has said he conceived Hereditary as fundamentally a family drama built in two distinct halves, a patient, grounded film about grief and generational trauma in its first half, and something far stranger and more supernatural in its second, with the horror elements emerging from the family's dysfunction rather than being bolted onto it. That structural choice is a big part of why the film unsettled audiences expecting a conventional horror movie experience going in. Aster wasn't interested in delivering scares on a predictable schedule. He was interested in making an audience sit inside a genuinely broken family for a full hour before anything supernatural even entered the picture, trusting that dread built from real grief would land harder than dread built from a monster ever could. Filming took place in Utah in 2017, with most of the interior scenes shot on a custom-built soundstage designed specifically to create a dollhouse-like aesthetic, a deliberate visual echo of Annie's own profession as a miniature artist, blurring the line between the set she builds in the story and the sets Aster's team built to tell it. Cinematographer Paul Pogorzelski shot the film with slow, deliberate camera movements that repeatedly frame characters as though they're being observed from a distance, reinforcing the sense that something outside the family has been watching and orchestrating events long before the story even begins. Composer Colin Stetson, better known for experimental saxophone work outside of film scoring, built a score using unconventional breathing and drone techniques that avoid typical horror movie stings entirely. Cast members have described the production itself as a genuinely chilling experience, with Aster pushing for emotional authenticity in scenes that required the actors to sit inside real grief for extended, uncomfortable stretches of filming. If you think that's crazy, then wait until you hear about its premiere at Sundance. Hereditary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 2018, placed in the festival's midnight section, typically reserved for the boldest and most extreme genre entries. Early reactions out of Park City were described as radiant but genuinely freaked out. Critics loved it, but plenty of attendees left visibly shaken by what they just watched. That reaction became part of the film's pre-release buzz, with word spreading that this wasn't just another festival horror entry but something considerably more intense. The cast, in interviews around the premiere, echoed that same sentiment about the shoot itself, describing scenes that required them to access genuinely difficult emotional places rather than perform grief and horror from a safe distance. That early buzz set expectations extremely high heading into the film's wide theatrical release 5 months later, expectations that, once a mainstream opening night audience actually showed up, split almost immediately down the middle. Here's a decision that directly echoes something else on this channel. A24 chose not to give Hereditary a traditional limited or platform release, the cautious rollout usually reserved for challenging art house horror. Instead, they sent it wide, straight into mainstream multiplexes nationwide, the same bet the studio had made 2 years earlier with The Witch. It was a genuinely risky call. Aster's vision was patient, bleak, and far from the kind of predictable mainstream horror experience that typically opens wide on a few thousand screens at once. Sending a slow-burn family tragedy with an occult twist directly into multiplexes meant it was going to be seen, on opening night, by exactly the audience least prepared for what it actually was. People expecting jump scares and a conventional monster, not 90 minutes of grief before anything supernatural even arrives. It was the same wager, made twice, by the same studio, on 2 directors willing to make audiences wait for the horror instead of front-loading it. The results were almost a direct replay of The Witch's own release 2 years earlier. Hereditary currently sits around 90% on Rotten Tomatoes among critics, with an average score near 9 out of 10 from top reviewers. Audiences told an entirely different story. CinemaScore, which polls opening night moviegoers as they leave the theater, handed it a D+, a genuinely rare, rough grade, reserved for films that actively anger the crowd that paid to see them. The audience score on Rotten Tomatoes landed around 58%, more than 30 points below the critical consensus. Ari Aster himself wasn't rattled by the grade. He said he saw the low CinemaScore as proof the film had actually reached a wide mainstream audience rather than staying safely contained to genre fans who already knew what they were signing up for, exactly the outcome A24's risky wide release was designed to produce in the first place, regardless of what the letter grade said about it afterward. Despite that brutal opening night grade, Hereditary turned into a genuine financial triumph. Made for roughly $10 million, it went on to gross more than $90 million worldwide, becoming one of A24's biggest hits at the time of its release. Word of mouth did exactly what the low CinemaScore threatened to prevent. Audiences kept showing up in the weeks after opening, driven by exactly the kind of intense, divided reaction that makes people need to see something for themselves and form their own opinion. The film's second weekend actually held up remarkably well compared to typical horror drop-offs, a sign that curiosity about the divisive reception was pulling in new viewers even as some early audiences left angry. A24 had bet that controversy and word of mouth would outperform a cautious, narrow release, and on Hereditary, that bet paid off many times over its original budget. In the years since, Hereditary's reputation has only grown. It's now routinely named among the greatest horror films of the 21st century, and Toni Collette's performance is widely considered one of the finest ever given in the genre, a fact that made her exclusion from that year's Academy Award nominations a genuine point of ongoing debate among critics and audiences alike. The film helped cement Ari Aster as one of the defining horror voices of his generation, directly enabling his follow-up film Midsommar, which received its own more modest C+ CinemaScore, and his later, more experimental work. Hereditary now sits alongside The Witch and Midsommar as a foundational entry in the elevated horror wave, a string of films united by exactly the same pattern, quietly building an audience that dismissed them on opening night into champions who now call them classics, decades ahead of the studios that released them ever expecting it. Here's what I have to say. Hereditary and The Witch tell almost the exact same structural story 2 years apart, and that's not a coincidence, it's a pattern. A24 kept betting that patient, grief-soaked horror could survive a wide release into an audience that wasn't ready for it, and kept winning that bet, one furious CinemaScore at a time. The D+ wasn't a verdict on the film's quality. It was a mismatch between what a mainstream crowd expected walking in and what Ari Aster actually built for them. Toni Collette's performance alone should have ended that debate permanently, and it still didn't get her the recognition it deserved. So here's my question for you: is a rough CinemaScore actually a warning sign? Or is it starting to look like a reliable indicator that a horror movie did something genuinely different? Tell me in the comments. If you're new here, subscribe. Don't forget to check out our full sci-fi and horror videos, you'll love it. New sci-fi and horror deep dives every week. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back on the next one.